by Globus.
Mote Africa, hello good people of Africa and the world at large. Thank you for joining us for another exciting moment. It is time for us to talk what matters for Africa as it is defining its way in the international arena. It's about its economic fabric. Together with a panel of experts, we are going to explore what it takes or what it would take practically for Africa to attain its financial independence. This has been re-echoed recently by the president of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama, and other leaders across the African continent. But then, how can we actually move from talking to practicality in ensuring this economic independence of the African continent? You know, the African Revolution does not only run solely along lines of politics or geopolitics. Its economic fabric is vital and even more urgent. Africa needs economic power to solidify its international relations, diplomacy, and other interconnected dynamics of the global world. Where is Africa's economic progress, and how close is the continent to its true financial independence? Is the Pan-African card and the payment system a breakthrough catalyst to boost intra-Africa trade under the African Continental Free Trade Area? What factors do you think inhibit African states' financial progress, and what practical steps are on the way to place the continent at the center of global economic decisions? In simple terms, financial independence denotes sovereign control over economic destiny, dropping aid dependency, slashing or reducing external debt, and building homegrown banks, currencies, and investment flows that serve the continent's 1.4 billion people and not the one that will serve international or foreign agenda. Economist Dambi Samayo once warned in her book Debt Aid that aid has been and continues to be an unmitigated political, economic, and humanitarian disaster for most part of the developing world. In the same light, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame once said that Africa must finance itself and reiterated, and I quote, "We cannot keep begging." Beyond political will and accountability, reports show illicit financial flows drain nearly $89 billion annually from Africa, about 3.7% of its GDP as of early 2026, driven by commercial tax evasion, to 65%, organized crime, about 30%, and corruption amounting 5%. This is according to Tax Justice Network Africa, and this report underline that the losses exceed $1 trillion over 50 years. Now we ask the question, can blockchain Pan-African currencies and green bonds flip the script? Is financial sovereignty feasible for Africa? And what are the indicators to point out at this juncture? With the panel of experts, we're going to dive into the dynamics of the economic fabric of the African continent and understand in total what has to be done, especially at the political level and even as far as economic policy makers are concerned. I will join you right after the jingle. It is time for Africa to strengthen its financial or economic prowess. And of course, these words were echoed recently by the Ghanaian president and other economic stakeholders across the African continent as they continue to chart ways to see how the continent can fully emancipate and, of course, to have your voice heard globally. It is always important that you have a strong say as far as economic decision making are concerned. Without much ado, we dive to uncovering this panel of today. And with pleasure, we want to take you to the United States of America. Let's welcome Dr. Ashil Eki, corporate finance expert and CEO, Washington Valuation Group. It's a pleasure having you on this timely program of Global Insight, talking economic stakes that will drive Africa to its total independence.
Thank you, Clarice. Thank you to all the Pan-Africanists listening to us today. It's a fantastic event today. You know, this show is going to be very enlightening. The topic is very timely, and the guests, you know, the panel of people that I'm with today is a very high quality panel. Hopefully, we're going to be able to provide enough information for our viewers to understand the topic thoroughly. So thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure for me to be here.
And thank you for accepting our invitation and sharing your knowledge to widen the scope, especially the economic scope of Africans now, so as we can be on the same wavelength with other countries of the world. Let's now come to the United Republic of Cameroon. I beg your pardon, especially to the political capital, joining Henry Kwam, who is founder and executive director, Cameroon Economic Institute. It's a pleasure having you this day.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Clarice. It's always a pleasure to come and share with other African experts about how we can make the continent better. And I am looking forward to a very productive conversation. You know, debt is such an important issue and will determine how fast and how well we develop as a continent. And so I think this is a timely topic that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely, it is indeed timely. And we are going to the United Kingdom. Let's welcome Dr. Andy Ukweni, geopolitics and strategic studies expert. We cannot just talk economy without looking at the other, stakes, especially the geopolitical stakes that do affect the economies of our continent. So it's a pleasure having you this day, Dr. Umbar, as we continue to, decode the reality of Africa's financial economic fabric.
Thank you for having me, Clarice, and greetings to the panelists. We hope to have a really impressive conversation tonight.
Indeed, thank you for also giving importance to this rendezvous. And to Canada, let's welcome Dr. Elijah Inwako, Director of Center for Africa Development. You are welcome to the program, sir.
Good morning, gentlemen and the lady in the studio. I think it's going to be, I've been away from this TV for a while now, and hopefully we're going to have a fruitful discussion about what's happening in our beloved continent in Africa. So thanks one more time, Gareth.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to have you again as you join the other experts to share your own understanding or probably analysis to the real economic stakes on how Africa can actually move from aid dependence to its, independence that will foster development and total transformation of the African continent. Subsequently, we are going to be joined by Kofi Don Ago, who is climate governance and also global event strategist. He'll be joining us from Ghana. Without much ado, we're going to right off with you, Dr. Ashil Eki, with an editorial on this very important topic that zooms on Africa's financial independence, looking at the feasibility of this?
Thank you, Clarice. Africa's financial independence is not a technical option, it is a historical necessity.
Yeah.
For over a century, the continent's economic arteries have been tied to foreign centers of power, ensuring African labor, land, and resources enrich others before they nourish Africans themselves. The real question is no longer whether independence is feasible, but whether Africa can afford the mounting cost of independence, of dependence.
Yeah.
From colonialism to today's loan and aid regimes, Africa's role has been engineered as a provider of raw materials and a recipient of prescriptions written elsewhere. Currency arrangements like the CFA franc keep whole regions tethered to foreign treasuries, while aid and debt conditions shape budgets that citizens never approved. This is not a natural weakness. It is a predictable outcome of a global financial order designed to keep Africa borrowing back its own wealth at a premium. A Pan-African response must reject the inferiority complex that says Africa is not ready to stand on its own. No continent that feeds the world is destined to be permanent food importer. No region so rich in minerals, energy, and human talent can be told it lacks collateral. The problem is not resources, but fragmentation and external capture. 54 states negotiating alone will always lose to United Africa acting through strong continental institutions. Financial independence is not isolation. It is the collective capacity to set priorities, mobilize internal resources, and choose partners without coercion. That means empowering African development banks, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds to invest first in African infrastructure, industry, and technology, deepening regional capital markets, and building payments and currency arrangements that serve African production and trade, not foreign balance sheets. This project demands political courage. African leaders must confront domestic beneficiaries of dependence, from elites who stash wealth abroad to lobbies that profit from import dependence. Citizens, in turn, must see that tougher tax systems and anti-corruption efforts are matched by visible investments in jobs, health, education, and infrastructure. Pan-Africanism must move from rhetoric to budget lines, from declarations to the hard work of institution building. There will be the cost and resistance from global powers, markets, and local elites alike. Ratings may be cut, threats of capital flight may rise. But Africa has already paid a heavier hidden price in lost opportunities and perpetual tutelage. The Pan-African position must be unapologetic. Financial independence is both feasible and non-negotiable if pursued collectively and patiently. It will not arrive by invitation. It will be won by deliberate choice, united action, and the refusal to accept that dependence is Africa's destiny. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashil Eki, for that, holistic introduction to the topic. And in the same perspective, I will come to you, Dr. Elijah Enwako, in your capacity as Director of Center for Africa Development. We know we can't really talk real development if we do not look at the economic fabric and measure the parameters for this economic fabric at the same time, and how it is translating into real development in the African continent. So we will appreciate your holistic, analysis of our topic before we get into, some of the specificities of the topic.
Okay, Clarice and ladies and gentlemen, I believe that a community, a society, a country is governed by institutions. And when you are talking about independence of whatever it is, political independence, financial independence, cultural independence, whatever independence you're talking about, you have to talk about the institutions that govern that society or that community. If the institutions that govern that community or that society or that country are weak, automatically you're going to see what we are talking about. So in general terms, I'm just talking about general terms now before we start going into the intricacies and all the stuff that we're going to talk about. They are institutions that govern financial independence of any country. The financial tools are there, the political tools are there, the social tools are there. So the institutions that govern such community must be standard, must be independent, must be respected, must be free from entanglement and all whatnot for us to talk about financial independence. So Africa does not yet have those independent institutions that are going to build a free, independent financial Africa. The instruments are many. You mentioned some of them in your intro. You talk about capital flight, you talk about corruption, you talk about this, you talk about that, you talk about that. But what are the institutions that are supposed to make sure that the foundation is there? They are lacking. So just to begin with, Africa needs to build those stable institutions that have boundaries, checks and balances, control systems that hold everybody to account for what he or she is doing. Then we can talk about financial independence of Africa. But if those institutions are either lacking or those institutions are either questionable, then we are building a very faulty foundation. And that is the problem we have in Africa. The foundation is so weak that whatever financial instrument you are talking about, pick one, pick two, pick 10, you will see that at the bottom of it is the fact that the institutions that are supposed to hold and safeguard that instrument of financial independence are weak or even non-existent. That's why anybody, Tom, Dick, and Harry can do whatever he wants and get away with it, because the institutions that are supposed to guarantee that financial independence are either not there or they are weak. So we'll come back with some of those instruments, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork here that let's talk about the institutions that we're supposed to build on in Africa. My colleague there just mentioned a couple of them, United Africa and all this and all that. But are the institutions there? Are they functional or they are non-existent? Then we can talk about African independence. So that's just the framework that I want to give on some of the things that I'll be talking about in the discussion.
Absolutely. Are the institutions working for the African continent, or is there an agenda to serve a third party? And of course, we will be understanding further this in the course of the program. We'll come to you, Henry. You've been very keen, especially as far as the economic dynamics of Cameroon and Africa in particular is concerned. So holistically, when we talk about Africa's independence, what comes to mind? And of course, what do you think is the feasibility of Africa? Do you think we still have a long way to go in terms of the willpower, or probably we need to work along the political lines as well to be able to attain the defined economic trajectory for the continent?
Thank you very much for the question, Clarice. So I think before we talk about the institutions that Africa needs, the strategies that Africa needs, it's important for us to bring back some context. The reason why we need financial independence is because Africa debt to GDP ratio is estimated at about 64% of GDP. from 67% in 2023. And over 40% of Africa's debt is owed to external private creditors, with 37% owed to multilateral banks, multilateral development institutions. So the reason why we need that independence is because African countries are spending more on repaying their debts than on investing in education and in healthcare. So, and you have countries like, it's true that most African countries have debt to GDP ratios that are less than 100%. In fact, most African countries haven't reached the level of G7 countries. If you look at countries like Japan where debt is over 250% of GDP, or France where it's at 100. The only country whose debt to GDP ratio is lower is Germany, under 100. But we still have cases like South Sudan where we 200% of GDP worth of debt. So it's imperative for us to find ways to address our debt burden. But we at CEPI, we're a bit more optimistic in our outlook because there are reforms that are being put into place. So it's true that Africa owes $1.8 trillion in debt, but the G20 common framework for debt treatment has been advanced very, very quickly, especially since South Africa's presidency of the G20. In fact, it took a lot more time to treat Zambia's debts, but we saw that Ethiopia was able to negotiate a memorandum of understanding and owe in less than 12 months. So Africa needs to have a seat at the table. And I think it started from the G20 first, but that also needs to extend to the United Nations and other multilateral banks, because it can't we cannot solve our debt issues if we look at it only from an African perspective, because we have external debt. And the most glaring issue is that African countries, until very recently, were trading amongst themselves and were still using the US dollar. So other reforms such as the Panafrican payment and settlement system that was launched after the African Continental Free Trade Area is going to help Africa save about 5 billion every single year in fees and in transfer charges. We already have about 500 banks from 15 countries that have signed up to the Pan-African payment and settlement system. But this system it's a very easy and intuitive system. So the infrastructure is already there when it comes to payments, because a trader in Nigeria can buy goods in Kenya, and the Kenyan trader can receive shillings directly. They don't have to convert their local currency into dollar, because that is costing Africa quite a bit, about 5 billion annually. And thirdly, if I may, I do agree with Dr. Elijah that institutions are very, very important, right? I think the Nobel laureates for 2024, Berenice Moglu, James Robinson, they've spoken about, they've shown through their research that countries that have better institutions tend to fare better. The issue isn't so much the debt in itself, but how the debt is utilized to improve the lives of Africans. If it's utilized in a productive way, if we invest in vital infrastructure or in trade-relevant infrastructure that actually generates economic growth, then it's easier for us to repay. But unfortunately, Africa is still marred. Africa faces huge governance challenges. That's the fact. We need better systems. We need much more informed leaders, and we also need a much more engaged citizenry to ensure that we can address the issue of debt. If I can just conclude with the fact that in order for Africa to escape its current trajectory of debt, I think there's and just before I forget, Africa is already raising its own capital, its own finance, right? Africa has a lot of hidden wealth. We talk about this wealth in terms of minerals, but unfortunately, minerals that are under the ground are not, real money. But the continent already holds about 1 trillion of the debt that it owes, including about $220 billion from pension funds and about 130 billion from sovereign wealth funds. So the institutions are there. Now the challenge is making sure that we continue to build on them. For example, accelerating the implementation of the African Credit Rating Agency to directly combat the African risk premium. Because even the IMF is aware that we tend to overprice Africa's debt because we attach an unfair and an unjustified level of risk to it. And so it's important that we advance the implementation of the African Credit Rating Agency, because these will ensure that economies are judged based on data and not bias. So for now, that's what I have to say. And also, our economies are going to grow at about 4.3% this year. So African and our countries are going to grow, outpacing the global average of about 3.4, 3.6.
Absolutely.
So the question isn't really Africa's ability to grow, Africa's ability to develop. It's just we have to just move from the point where financial independence is not a dream, right? We have 8 regional economic communities. We have fragmented capital markets. That isn't going to change in the next 30, 40 years. Even the European Union hasn't been able to create the capital markets union, because countries have this domestic investor bias. That's fine. But we just have to ensure that the standards at which African investors, Africa's private sector, Africa's financial services sector operate on are similar to those across North America and across Europe.
Sure.
Because today, if you're an African today on this call, I cannot leave right now and buy some government bonds or trade assets on the stock exchange, because we haven't digitized our system enough to increase the participation, because the capital is here. And we've seen the likes of Tony Elemelu state that eloquently. Africa has the capital. It's about mobilizing the capital and engineering it in a way that generates the most positive returns.
Absolutely, and all of that will come to what we are going to uncover with you, Dr. Ba Andy. What is Africa's economic strategy to be able to attain practically this financial independence? Let's try to get from you holistically, especially looking at Africa's geoeconomics, and at what level are we towards ensuring the feasibility of a high, financial prowess or independence across the continent.
Okay, thank you very much, Clarice. I'm happy that the topic today talks about independence, but at a much more financial level, so that at least we can allow our politicians have peace of mind at their various national circles. At this level, we are talking more about interconnectivities and collaborations, talking more about international trade, if you may. But let's deep dive a little bit into history. In the post-World War II era, there was a reality that hit the European community that suggests that the war-torn economies of Europe will be greatly devastated if something real fast was not done about that reality, the post-war reality. So in response to that, there was a conference in Hampshire where about 44 nations came together to extrapolate ideas on how to get out of that very threatening situation. So the outcome of that meeting was what we later have as the Bretton Woods Institution. So the Bretton Woods Institution was structured on a tripartite standing where one is supposed to depend, or where all 3 legs are supposed to depend on each other for formidable productivity and enhancement of results. One of it is the first leg is the IMF, which basically concentrates with money, right? Providing funds for countries that had issues with debt, right? Trying to give relief to such countries and help them manage their policies, internal policies and structure in order to solve the problem that they've got. The other leg is the World Bank, right? The World Bank is was basically interested in poverty. I mean, the argument is that poverty breeds conflict. So if poverty was adequately tackled at the root, I mean, the issues of violence, conflict, insurgencies, and military juntas taking over democratic institutions will probably begin to dwindle down. So it came up. The goal was basically to bring to an end extreme poverty, in countries, and by way of promoting economic development. That was the key objective for World Bank as at the point of creation. And you have the third leg, which is the World Trade Organization, which is the center of what we're discussing today, fostering a platform for trade collaborations, interconnectivities, transnational trade activities, elimination of barriers to trade and tariffs, and all of those sorts of issues. Now, these were solutions that people decided to get back after a major global conflict. Get back to the drawing board, sit down together, have a real dialogue, come up with initiative, with ideas, with homegrown solutions that are peculiar to their realities, and brought on the table for further cleanup until these tripartite solutions that have become global institutions, very formidable, very influential today. Now, the question that I have for Africa is that, at what level? I mean, these are post-1945 realities until 1961, when effectively these institutions were ruled out and generally, living up to its expectations. But before this, if you want to go a little bit deeper, you would have other organizations, for example, the Organization of Economic Cooperation of Europe, where initiatives were put on the table for further support. That organization later became the Organization of Economic Development, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, that was providing official development assistance to countries that needed such support. Now, moving to Africa, have we been able to rally around ourselves, deploy both human and material resources to such a point where we have what you can call a frank conversation, a properly held conversation beyond rhetorical expressions, beyond what you might call alliances of the baboons? Have we been able to come to the table to identify our peculiarities as a people, our challenges as a people, and the way forward in the advancement of those objectives? If yes, I ask again, how far? How far have we gone since we started that conversation? But if not, then I would add that that is the real beginning of success. If what we have, if I want to differ with my friend who spoke a little while ago, the issue of an integrated African system in terms of the free movement of goods and goods and services is not new to the discourse as far as the African community is involved. This has evolved over time, but the discipline that is expected of such a high-ranking deliberation, that is expected of such a high-ranking organization, is not demonstrated so much as expected. So when you begin to ask the relevant questions, you'll discover the internal weakness and the political immaturities that are current realities in most, if not all, of these African nations. And for any economic policy to do well, you need an assertive political strength to drive it to a logical conclusion. So what kind of nations in Africa do we have? Do we have nations that understand the dire consequences of attempting to live independently? Or do we understand the consequences as nations of Africa? Do we understand the consequences of attempting to not take advantage of the numerous benefits of international trade? It does look attractive to run in the direction of rent seeking. So African states have been described as rentier states in pursuit of what you have, what you can make out of it. So financial independence in 2026, as we have it, should rather project a shift from external dependency, which is pro-aid and foreign-dominated debt, towards a more sovereign financial architecture. At the moment, the continent possesses about 2.5 trillion in domestic resources, including pension funds, as somebody spoke earlier, and sovereign wealth. So if we have not mentioned, what do you call it? I've forgotten. What do you call it? I'll remember when I do. I'll mention it to you. But then we have not been able to. The export of finance from the other part of the world to Africa, right, is still a very important source of financial strength for Africa. But we have not really come to a table where issues are laid bare and political discipline put side by side with these issues, as the rest of the world is doing. Today, we have the IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization giving assistance to Africa. When is Africa going to deploy its solutions and also become a dependable leg that other parts of the world can lean on for support, until we get to that level where we are able to develop a homegrown African solution that attempts to solve problems the African way, until we trust ourselves enough to open our borders to our neighbors and brothers. Then it is a big question mark as regards the possibility first, today or tomorrow, of an African that is formidable and willing to rise above the vestiges of colonial impressions that is hanging around our neck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mba. And of course, that is why we're here on this platform today, to answer the very pertinent questions which you just raised. When will it be a practical stance? Coming back to you, Dr. Ashiu Eke, let's look at those blueprints or pillars that can be put in the development models of the African continent that will leave us or move us from the rhetorical stage of discourses to a more practical space that will actually make us benefit practically from globalization and international trade.
Right. So it's important that we say this. Financial independence is tied to economic independence, which is also tied to political independence, right?
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they're all linked. They're all linked, and you can't have one without another, because the way the world is set up today, it's very challenging for countries that are trying to, put their heads out of the water to be able to survive if they don't understand that triptych, the three elements. And this is why we see in Africa today some countries, coming together, like the Alliance of Sahelian countries, to together put forward a strategy to be able to survive in this world which is dominated by superpowers like the United States, who can get up one morning and start bombarding, destroying countries around the world because somebody is not happy about X, Y, and Z. So I think that's what they understood. They understood that the first thing, they have to have political, alliance. They have to, political unity is critical. Then based on that, but that political unity also depends on the level of protection for their citizens that they built. In this case, the army, right? So we see that all these are intertwined, because if they couldn't acquire the tools to fight all these terrorists that have been funded by Western countries to go destroy and put those countries' economy and political system, to shatter those countries, then they would not be in existence to be having a political alliance, let alone an economic one or a financial one in the future. So it's very important that we understand that we can't move forward if we don't acquire the political independence, and that's the key thing that I want to stress here.
Sure.
But acquiring political independence has risk, which is why military build-up is also part of the package. It's very explicit when you look at the silent countries. If you can't have political independence if you are vulnerable to the whims of Donald Trump or Macron or anybody else in the world who is trying to bamboozle you, and to corrupt your system, to do whatever they've been doing for the past 200 years and more. So it's not going to work. So it's important that we understand that, because I see some people think we can dissociate one part from another. No, it's not dissociated.
It's actually intertwined.
You have to have all of them together.
Sure.
But the issue is, how do we get there? And this is one of the things that we talk about Junior Solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But if you allow, I don't know, Clarice, if it's possible for technicians to be able to show us some of the charts, possible maybe next time.
Absolutely. You have that, Dr. Ashiki.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So yes. All right. So here on this chart, we are talking about what is this chart? Okay.
It's Africa's illicit financial flows.
Okay, Africa illicit
aid
financial.
and, yeah.
Right. Exactly. So we see here that Africa illicit financial flow is about $89 billion. And official development assistance, which is called aid, is estimated to be $48 billion. These are numbers from, I think, 2023, I believe. And the foreign direct investments is estimated to be about $54 billion. So what does that mean? It means that, Africa is still losing a lot of money, because of the fact that, its economy is extroverted. So that's one chart that expresses that. So let's move to the second chart.
The second chart on average IMF loan size from 1952 to 2023.
Okay, the second chart should be the African Union. The African Union chart.
Well, while you find the chart, Clarice, can I just say that I do agree that on the one hand, Africa appears to be like a shackle, but it's also important that we Africans also take some of the responsibility, because The reason why we end up having to restructure debt like we did during the COVID-19 pandemic under the G20 Common Debt Framework is because we don't invest sufficiently in our own local capital market. It's true that now the local government bond market is beginning to develop across much of Africa. I think about 500 billion. It's much larger than the total amount of aid that the continent gets. But before we talk about any independence, we need to invest in our own system. We need to use our currencies. We need to ensure that our citizens are the ones who are investing in projects, etc. Dr. Shil, you have the floor whenever.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, excellent. Okay, so thank you. So this chart is talking about African Union, right? So African sources that are funding African Union are estimated to be at 77.5%. 77.5% that are external partners that are funding African unions. And African sources for the funding of that union is only estimated at 22.5%, which is abysmal, right? So we can't think about having financial independence, economic independence, or political independence if we are not able to manage our own institutions or fund those institutions effectively with our own resources.
Yes.
Right? So next chart, please. Let's the IMF now. Number 3. Okay, great. Yes. So on this chart, so we see that between 1952 and 2023, Africa received about 40% of all IMF loan commitments. But Africa gets less than 10% of total IMF lending volume. You see the graph, right? So that means that Africa goes to the IMF roughly four times out of every 10 programs, but gets under $1 in $10 the IMF disburses. That is dependence without power. Next chart, please.
You have it.
That's an interesting chart. But Doc, the problem is not, is it really the IMF or is it the fact that
let me finish.
Oui, vas-y, Doc. J'attendais juste que le graphique se...
Voilà, great. All right. So let's stay on the IMF side. So we see the average IMF loan to an African country is about $0.2 billion, which is about $200 million. The average IMF loan globally is about 0.8 billion, which is about $887 million. So we see that the typical African program is only a quarter the size of the average IMF program globally. So we are frequent patients in a system where we neither set the rules nor get real treatment. Next chart, please. Next chart.
You have it, please. The African pension assets.
African pension assets.
Yeah, versus infrastructure gap.
Okay. All right. So I think we have time issues, but we're going to move forward.
Yeah.
All right. So we see the green bar is showing that African pension asset is estimated to be $500 billion US. That's the green chart. The orange bar shows, the green bar, the orange bar shows annual infrastructure financing gap of $400 billion US. All right. So we see that Africa already has 5 times the savings needed to close its annual infrastructure gap but less than 3% of those savings actually go into African infrastructure. The money exists. The will to deploy it is the problem. It does not. Next, please. Here, we talked about the illicit financial outflow versus the combined aid and FDI inflows. The red bar shows the illicit financial flows estimated at 89 billion per year, and the blue bar shows the aid and foreign direct investment combined to be about $147 billion per year. So that means for every dollar Africa receives in aid and investment, it loses roughly 60%, or I'm sorry, 60 cents through illicit flows, right? For every dollar, it loses roughly 60 cents to illicit flows. This is not a development model. It is a leaking bucket. Next chart, please. And this should be the last one.
Yes, sure, is the last one, the 9th chart.
Right. Not working? Okay.
Ashu, you can just speak to it.
Okay, all right. So if it's not working, so we're going to say, we'll talk about Africa GDP here, which is the last chart. Okay.
Yes.
So the current pass for African GDP is $2.6 trillion, estimated in 2023, to be around 6.36 trillion in 2043. So this is in about 17 years from now. So if we don't do any reform, that's where we're going to be ending up. But if we do any reform or integration, then we can move up from 263 trillion in 2023 to 8.86 trillion in 2043 in 70 years. So this is a huge loss that we are incurring on the current path right now in terms of GDP growth in Africa. So this is to diagnose the current situation of Africa, so we can see where we are today in different aspects of Africa's economy. So my analysis here is that we need to change course, and given all this chart that we've seen, we need to chart our own path, taking into account our most important needs first, and then making sure that we don't follow the current existence, economic system that's been put in place to please the Western countries. It's not for us. We cannot be developing or be independent, of either financial, political, or economically if we stay on course like this. It's not possible. We need to have a way to chart our own course. And the African Union, as it's currently financed, is not the vehicle to do that. It's completely embedded within the current structure that we have, which is not working for Africa.
Of course, talking about the structure in the same perspective, while talking earlier on, Dr. Enwako, you highlighted the fact that we need institutions that will drive Africa towards its financial independence and also its economic independence. And if we can take probably from the chart that we just presented to us now by Dr. Ashu Eki, who want to understand in your own perspective as a development expert, what therefore are those key parameters that you need, that you think needs to be put in place at this juncture to ensure that there is a model of development that suits the context of the African continent, after we must have put the political, economic, and the social factors together to ensure that this is feasible towards, having the Africa we want?
Okay, Clarice, I hope you're going to give me enough time to elaborate my time, my
Absolutely,
concept, because
absolutely.
this is absolutely crucial for us to do this. Because
Sure.
I've listened to a lot of my colleagues there with due respect to all their intellect and all their knowledge. It is absolutely true. But at the same time, we need to focus because I've listened with keen interest. It seems to me that we are shifting the responsibility of African independence to others. And we're forgetting that if you do not remove the nail that's pinching the shoe, you can go all around crying all over the world. You will still not solve the problem. Number one, my colleagues have duly explained a couple of things here. One of them, which they mentioned, was their heavy dependence on external debt.
Sure.
And let's be very, very Caesar focused. How does that heavy dependence on an external debt, how did it come about? And we have vivid cases in Africa that we can use to illustrate this point. Ladies and gentlemen, the IMF and the World Bank, they came out not long ago, I think it was last year, 2025, and they decided to do something that exposed Africa. They decided to cut the bilateral aid that African countries were having. And if you see the shock that was felt on the African continent, if you see the shock that was felt on the African continent,
I remember that.
It will tell you where the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take some cases here. Nigeria, next door neighbor to Cameroon, recently went to the international community. I can't remember what the World Bank or the IMF, and they said they were borrowing money. And they qualified and they were giving, I can't remember the exact amount, colossal sums of money.
Sure.
What did they do? The Nigerian government brought that money and decided to pay salaries and increase the income of members of parliament. Are you going to blame the IMF or are you going to blame the Nigerian government?
And that's where the
Ladies
problematic
and gentlemen,
lies.
let's be realistic. Let's be honest and realistic here.
Really.
Because we are beating about the bush and putting all this chat and all these things and say Africa and this and that. Who are you to blame? Let me say this. It is actually, that is not a problem. My colleague there, Dr. Henry, I think mentioned that, the debt to service ratio, you look at the world, the Western countries, is very high. But that is not where the problem is.
Yeah.
What are they doing with the money that they borrow? The United States is happy at every time to go and borrow money. Why? They know where the money is going to be invested and they know the return on that investment. It's not going to be borrowed to pay federal government employees. The money is not going to be paid, the investment is a revenue generating investment that the government needs to go into. But African government borrow money, increase the salary of members of government, increase the salary of MPs, increase the salary of this. And number two, let's talk about the debt to service ratio that my colleague just talked about there.
Yeah.
It is one of the things that is killing Africa. African government are borrowing money not to invest. They are borrowing money to service the debt that they have already incurred. That's where the problem is. They are not actually paying or invest in the economy. They are actually servicing the debt, which is huge. Let's talk about the high, one of my colleagues there talked about, where the source of revenue is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
They say, he who pays the piper dictates the tune. Let's take the case of Mali and Burkina Faso. These two countries decided, I think it was Burkina Faso, if I remember very vividly, he decided to reject external funding. He launched a campaign of local funding of the economy. I am telling you, you go and do your research. You will see what came in when there is confidence in the economy.
Sure.
When locals have confidence in the economy, they are going to invest in the economy of that country. But because of lack of confidence, that is what I said, that the institutions that are supposed to guarantee financial independence in Africa are not there. They are not there. They need to be built. When there's lack of confidence in the economy, who is going to be buying those bonds? Who is going to be buying those treasury bonds? What for? How is it going to be paid? Mm-hmm. People do not have the confidence. But because this young man instituted confidence in the local investors. Go and check how much Burkina Faso raised locally. How much they are using locally to fund the economy. And go and look at this, the development that's going on in that country. So when we are talking, let's not, be so, blame game and so on and so forth.
Sure.
Let's look inwardly. Let's look inwardly and see where Africa is failing. Because this dependence becomes cyclical. You go and borrow, you are in debt. Then you go back and borrow money to begin to service the debt. There's no financial sovereignty. That's what I'm writing at. Number 3, let's talk about the commodity prices, ladies and gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are talking about financial dependence here. Africa has the means to be financially independent. Look at the commodities that Africa is producing today. How much of it is finished on the African continent? How much of it? When you talk about cocoa, you talk about rubber, you talk about mining sector, you talk about anything. How much of those products are finished on the African continent? How do you get financial independence when your own raw resources are being finished from outside and sent back to you at almost 5 times the price of that good? How do you get financial independence? So, because of that, and because of dependence on those natural resources, any fluctuation in the commodity prices that sometimes is caused by the Western world, is not caused by Africans. It's caused by the Western world because they know what they're doing.
Sure.
I talked to people from Africa today, especially on the cocoa sector, and they were telling me that a couple of months ago, cocoa was at 5,000 francs CFA a kilo. But today, they're talking about 800 francs. What will cause the price to drop?
Drastically.
Between 1 year,
yeah.
from 5,000 to 800. Ladies and gentlemen, why can't we do the transformation of cocoa to chocolate in Africa? What is difficult in doing that? We do not have the institutions to do that. We must build the institution that is going to guarantee that kind of financial independence. That's what I'm talking about. Let's talk about weak revenue mobilization. I mean, domestic. My colleague, I think Dr. Henry, talked about it already. How much of the financing of our economy comes from internal capital generation?
Yeah.
Where are the capital market? Some of you are in Cameroon. You heard about Cameroon Stock Exchange some time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Does it exist today, Monsieur Henry?
Well, today it's become the daily market.
It doesn't
Yes,
exist.
it's become a central African trading system above the value.
An elephant is a white elephant project that does not exist. They talked about it does not exist. I expect to see when it comes to
Dr. Elijah,
I expect to see listing of those companies that exist in Douala because I want to invest. I want to invest in Africa. If I do not see it, if it's an elephant project, how do you expect me, a Cameroonian born professional outsider, how do you expect me to invest in Cameroon? If I do not see
Please, Henry, let's just listen to Dr. Enoko while he culminates before you can comment.
So
please.
that is what I'm saying. You have weak domestic capital revenue mobilization, very weak, so dependent on external funding. Mm-hmm. That is where we are being killed. What about the structural vulnerabilities? Institutions, just the institutions that I talk about. We talked about inflation. Some few years ago, we talked about Africa, it's going through inflation. There's so much inflation in Africa. It's not manageable and so on. What is causing that? One of my colleagues a while ago just talked about, the borrowing rate of African countries. If, ladies and gentlemen, go to the World Bank, the records are online. Anybody can check it. Go and look at what rate African countries borrow money from the IMF and the World Bank. Compare that to what the Western world is borrowing. Mm-hmm. And number 2, the international community will tell you that the assets of Africa, some of them, they will tell you that the revenue, the reserve, and so on and so forth. But how do you tell me, how do you prove to me or justify to me that countries like France, countries like the United Kingdom, they have no gold generating assets anywhere, but African countries that have
the assets that can generate, what is called the reserve in the international community, like gold and so on, because that's what backs up the currency. African countries have that, but we are not able to use that to back up our purchasing power, our borrowing power, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Why can the African continent not put a moratorium or some sort of an embargo about the exploitation of gold on the continent of Africa that Western countries are using to back up their borrowing power and their purchasing power? Because when you go there, they'll tell you, what is your asset? I mean, your reserve power. What's the foreign reserve? You looked at it, they say it's depleted. How do the Western world get the currency reserve so stack up? Meanwhile, they do not have any gold, any of those assets that's backing up their purchasing power and their borrowing power.
Mm-hmm.
So we do not have the institutions. We must build the institutions that are going to guarantee African financial independence. Independence. My colleague talked about, local, evaluators that are going to evaluate the African economy.
Sure.
And take it away from so-called risk, because that's what they are using. The Western world is going to say Africa is so risky. If we borrow to Africa at this rate and so on and so forth, therefore we're going to lend to them at 15% and then lend to the Western world at 0.5%. What calculation, what guarantee or lack of it thereof is in Africa that will make the World Bank and the international community to say we are going to lend to Africa at 15%? Because we Africans have not built the institutions that we can use to generate our own local revenue. Let's talk about diversification. African economy is so dependent on local resources. If a country is producing oil and gas, almost 80% of the economy is going to be funded by oil and gas. That is not sustainable. That's not sustainable. The service industry in Africa is almost non-existent. Almost non-existent. Why can't we build on what we have, ladies and gentlemen? So this discussion all the time of blaming the Western world, this and that, I don't buy into it. Never. I don't buy into it, because there are glaring cases on the continent of Africa that proves to us that Africa can come out of this financial quagmire by itself. Look at Botswana. Just imagine Botswana. My colleague talked about, the Western world, United States is going to threaten you with this. Why has the United States not threatened Botswana? Why have they not threatened the other few, Namibia and so on? Go and look at the economy and what's happening there. So what I'm trying to say here is that let us look inwardly and see where the causes of the problem is before we start throwing our bullets outside and say A or B or C or D, because there's so much mess that's happening on the continent of Africa. We have not put our house in order before we go out there, begin to blame the others. It is possible to have financial independence in Africa. A few countries have shown it. I just talked to you about Burkina Faso.
Absolutely.
They have proven to the world that you can be financially independent without depending on the Western world. And the conditions have been put in place. They do not borrow money. They don't raise money in order to pay civil servants, in order to raise the income of others.
Okay.
And if you look at, let me just summarize by saying this, something that happened in Burkina Faso recently. When the leader there came to power, he made an ultimatum. He said, he is giving, you can go online and Google it. He's giving all those who have, stolen money from the economy 48 hours to deposit that money into the local economy or be investigated and jailed for life. Mm-hmm. Go and see how much entered the Burkina Faso treasury within a space of 48 hours. Within a space of 48 hours. And almost, if I remember the last figures I saw, 25% of the revenue that he needed to generate for that fiscal year came from that money. 25%. Mm-hmm. Africa must put the institutions in place that are going to guarantee financial freedom. That's all I'm trying to say here. Without those institutions, we can borrow all over the world. We can talk about this and go on and show everything. But without those institutions, Africa will not be out of It's economic quagmire. So that is what I was trying to say.
Absolutely.
I don't want to monopolize the discussion.
Of course, Dr. Enoko, we want to look at the intentionality and, of course, policy shifter, and also the aspect of accountability in ensuring both financial and economic independence for the African continent. And of course, if we want to take Burkina Faso, which you just highlighted, we are going to align again with what Dr. Enoko said a while ago, that all the factors are intertwined. Political independence driving us to, making also very independent decisions that will lead to economic buoyancy. And with you coming back to you, I don't know if Mr. Kofi has joined the conversation already. Then I would love to go meet him in Ghana and welcoming him to obviously analyze from where Dr. Enoko started with the aspect of accountability, policy dynamics, and also intentionality in ensuring that there is a development model that will ensure an autonomous economic power for the continent Africa.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry for joining late, and good evening or good afternoon to all of you. I have a program somewhere, and I need to run and come and sit in my car to contribute to this to this discussion.
Thank you.
Yes, so sorry for coming late to the show. Yes, the last speaker really sound interesting, and I must say thank you so much for all the comments you make so far. As far as discipline is concerned, I see it from a discipline point of view, because it looks as if Africa is not disciplined when it comes to practical issues, and we continue blaming the Western world. And that is, for me, where I see one of the challenges of the African people. Talking about whether financial independence is fixable or not, I must say it's very flexible. But until what I keep on saying is, until we come to the realization, we change our mind, the mind has not been reset. The Ghana president said, we want to reset the agenda. It means that everyone must reset our agenda. Mm-hmm. We must reset our economy. We must reset our political understanding. We must reset every aspect of our economy, must be reset. Until we do that, we will not be independent in any aspect of our life, because Europeans and Americans do not love us than they love their country. Europeans don't love us better than they do. So it means we must love ourselves better than others to develop our country. So until we realize that we can do so many things by ourselves, by stopping corruption, by making sure that we build the systems. I remember when the former president of the United States of America visited Ghana some years back, he said, Ghana should build institutions, but not individuals. What it means is that we are building people to become more powerful than institutions themselves. Mm-hmm. If you're not able to build institutions to prosecute the agenda, to make sure that issues are well tabled, to be able to help us to transform our economy, we'll continue to linger and do the things that we find ourselves in doing, because it must work for us. But because we have not reset our mind, we have not set the agenda to make sure that we become independent in the things that we do, we continue to rely on the Western world. And I was very happy again, the previous speaker indicated that why are we not putting cocoa, for instance? We export raw cocoa to the Western world, and then they bring it back to us again. And I think it's no. If you have cocoa, why don't you produce cocoa here? You grow cocoa here, put it into a finished good, and use it here in Africa. We can trade among ourselves and be financially independent. But the way we are going, at times I feel so sorry and I feel so pity for the next generation here to come. When you come to Ghana, issues of galamsey is a very serious issue. And I, from climate person point of view, I say that all these things are destroying our environment. destroying our economy. And that would definitely not help us to develop or to become financially independent. But rather, the individuals that are into this gold mining will rather enrich themselves. But the country will not be enriched. So I agree with, I don't know what the other speakers have said already, but I'm of opinion that yes, financial independence is feasible, is possible, but until we realize that our mindsets, our attitude, our corruptions, and the way we build individuals, we need to stop that and rather build institutions that will help us to become financially independent in all aspects of our life, politically, the financial micro thing that you talk about, and all aspects of our life. Until we set our mind, we will not be able to develop. So this will be my initial comment. And as we go on, we would then talk more about the other aspects of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's about setting the right agenda for the African continent. And of course, what is this agenda? And of course, what are the policy dynamics that will practicalize this agenda with you, Henry Quorm, as a policy, probably economic policy pundit. Let's try to understand now if we can get from all what has been presented by the different speakers. It means that we need to be more practical in how we drive that financial independence in Africa. So what do you think are those policies that will ensure a strong development model to change the understanding of financial independence, especially as Africa deals with others in line with international trade?
Thank you very much, Clarice. So I think it's important for us to remember that Africa is making some progress. That progress is slow, but Africa is making some progress.
How can we make it somehow faster?
So I think we should see, for example, Dr. Elijah mentioned the capital market.
Yeah.
We have the BVMAC, and we have companies who are listed there ranging from banks to agriculture companies, etc., from Socapam to La Regionale. Mm-hmm. Where what we are trying to do at the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute is get them to digitize faster, so that the diaspora can invest across Africa and buy shares in companies that they want to support and in whose mission or in whose revenue they believe in. So I think it's also important for us to note that yes, Africa isn't making as progress as fast as we hoped it would, but there has been some progress and there has been some developments on key areas like the capital market. In Rwanda, for example, the capital markets are nearly fully digitized.
Let's have a discussion here, Mr. Henry. What did you say, the digitization of what?
The digitization of the stock exchange.
What about digitization of the
please, can we give Henry time to talk and then we comment later?
No, I think it's important that we have like an exchange instead of monologue, right?
So that it becomes interactive.
Like I think on the one hand, we have to ensure that, and you guys at the diaspora, the United States, Britain, Norway, France, etc., you should all be able to take a phone and you should be able to invest in Africa in any country you see. That's the digitization we need. But the capital markets are already formed and they are already functioning. Unfortunately, you have to go through banks before you buy government bonds or you invest in local companies. So those are the things that we have to try and accelerate. And secondly, the reason why we really need this financial Africa has to root itself of external lending, which we can't, is simply because we haven't been able to mobilize domestic investments because our economies are hugely informal. You can't have 85% of people employed in the informal sector and you expect them to get an app and invest in the financial market. So we have to make sure that we are able to, we create mechanisms for these people to be able to invest. For example, through USSD banking. Just as we do with mobile money across the continent, you type in the code, you invest an amount, and then you can make the return. If we make investments more inclusive, then Africa will be able to raise a lot more finance than it currently does. And I want us to, I think it's important that we also we understand that Africa is not working or operating in a silo. Africa is operating within the global financial system, which means that no matter what happens, even if tomorrow 100% of trade across the continent between Ghanaian traders and software developers in Cameroon and fashion designers in Morocco and aluminium smelters in South Africa, even if trade happens within our own currencies, which it will with the Pan-African payment and settlement system, we are still going to need to borrow in the dollar simply because there's no country that is like fully self-sufficient. Even Sweden and Norway have just a GDP ratios of about 40%, and they still borrow from international investors. So the opportunity for us as Africans is first to make sure that we are reforming the global financial infrastructure, which means that at the IMF level, we need to make sure that the sustainability and resilience trust is available to low-income countries, regardless of whether they just exited an IMF program or not. It's making sure that we are putting money that countries need at their disposal, whilst, of course, leveraging our domestic investments and domestic investors. And finally, no matter what we do today, if African economies, if we don't diversify our economies, we won't be able to reach financial independence. Many countries across the continent are already banning exports of raw materials. Zimbabwe, Zambia, Ghana have all banned the export of raw lithium, and they're forcing companies to come and process the lithium locally before they export it to other markets. It's worked in Indonesia. Indonesia did this 3 years ago. Everybody thought they were going to fail, but before Indonesia went about banning exports of raw material, they made sure that they had the energy to process. It took them about 3 to 4 years to ensure that they had a stable enough grid to ensure processing, because processing minerals is energy hungry. So we have to ensure that whilst we're talking about bans, we also have to be aware that there are millions of people that rely on artisanal mining and whose daily bread and whose income, revenue, standards of living rely on the sale of this mineral. So when we talk about bans, we should also be aware that it's not just talking about banning and processing. No, it doesn't happen overnight. We need to ensure that we have sufficient energy to support the industries and the companies that can process the minerals, which means that the banning of minerals should really happen in about 2 or 3 phases. And if we do that, it would allow those people in the informal sector who are watching today to be able to transition. Because if they have 3 years or 4 years to transition, the companies who are coming to build the plant can now say, I'm going to only buy 10 tons of lithium or 10 tons of cobalt from the informal sector. And then they have the time to pull together and sell together. These are not things that happen overnight. So I welcome the recommendations. I think it's important that Africa, takes the step to make its minerals sovereign and to ensure that it's building the reserves it needs. But it's important for us to consider the social factors, because if we can make these reforms work, it means we will be exacerbating the digital divide. Lastly, regarding our currencies. Cameroon is still tied to our currency is pegged to the euro at 650. Before we transition out of the euro, we need to look at the experience of countries that transition and at what level they transition. If African countries that import 80% of the food that they consume want to transition to their own currencies, they need to get to the level where they only import about 40% of the food and goods that they consume. If they do that, it reduces the pressure on our foreign exchange reserves, because at the moment, most African countries have the import cover. If you look at the foreign exchange, whether it's dollar or the Japanese yen or the Chinese renminbi or the British pound, we only have about 4 to 6 months of import cover. That's not sufficient because we import a lot. So before we talk about moving to our own currencies, even when we have the goal, we have to make sure that our economies are properly diversified and that we also reduce the economic dependence. Because if we move to our own currencies, we might become a Zimbabwe, we might become an Argentina. Argentina is gunning for its independence, but they cannot survive without American loans or IMF support. So I think all of the recommendations from my colleagues are very much welcome. What for Africa to be independent, it starts first with a change in the mindset. We cannot want to develop like the West, where we only have a mobile application so people buy stocks and bonds, where companies go and list their shares. We don't even have addresses. So we have to build a certain level of trust between the informal sector and potential investors before it happens. And the last thing I would like to state is that we at CEPI were all about private sector development, and it's the private sector that is going to lead to Africa's development. We need good institutions, that's true, but the African Union can play a coordinating role at the regional level, but ultimately we have 54 countries, and 54 countries have separate regulatory regimes, whether it comes to capital markets or e-commerce. This is why with the African Continental Free Trade Area, we have to start implementing the protocols on digital trade, the protocols on e-commerce, the protocols on intellectual property, and on settlement of disputes, so that it's easy and it's rational it's easy for anyone who wants to invest in the continent to do so. At the moment, implementation is very slow. Africa, we already have the foundations that say how data is going to be managed across the continent, foundations that say how data is going to be stored and handled, how we are going to deal with cybersecurity risks. Now it's about us harmonizing all of these foundations so that we can build on them sustainably.
Absolutely.
So I think it's not about our leaders, right? African leaders, our institutions need to surpass the leaders. If we've not created institutions where transparency, accountability, and governance are the norm, then there's nothing, one leader wouldn't come and change that, because one leader will come, change it for 10, 20 years, goes, and then everything goes back to normal. We citizens have to demand better accountability from their leaders, and citizens also have to engage. Because when you hear that your country has taken a $145 million loan from the World Bank or the IMF, which is called Official Development Assistance, citizens have to check at what interest rate are they taking those loans. Is it 7 or 10%? Or is it like the Chinese, where we don't pay any interest for 10 years, then we end up paying 15% interest later on? So we at CEPI, we unequivocally condemn the inability of governments to disclose any agreements that is signed when it comes to lending for infrastructure projects or for other projects. Africans deserve to know. It is unacceptable, but Africans also have to take the step and make sure that we're not just talking about these solutions, but that we're engaging in a way that can allow everyone to be part of the solution.
Indeed, allowing everyone to be part of the solution and understanding the intricacies of all the economic dynamics across the African continent. And while talking about diversification and other ways Africa can evolve to its financial autonomy, it is imperative to also identify some of the complexities with you, Dr. Andy. We want to look at this era of geopolitics of trade. We saw, especially at the international level, the BRICS came with the de-dollarization plan, and we saw the reaction from the United States through tariffs. And we can also see that the African continent wanting to take such a radical stance to evolve economically and financially will actually meet some sort of contestations, especially from Western dominated economic models. So how can we define Africa's economic geopolitics of trade in this juncture, and what scope does the continent have at this moment to maybe revitalize its stance as far as ensuring a clear trajectory of economic and financial independence?
Okay, thank you very much, Clarice. if you want to pick a case study, let's clearly pick the African Continental Free Trade Area,
Absolutely.
which is a flagship of the African Union Agenda for 2063. A number of key, issues have been isolated alongside that program, and top of it is trying to create a single market for the African community, as well as trying to push for trade liberalization and to boost intra-African trade, as well as promote industrialization and diversification. Like I always tell you, Clarice, if wishes were horses, even the blind will ride. Now, we have taken ample time to discuss macroeconomic issues and policy angles to these issues in a bid to extrapolate possibilities that are open in possible corridors. But my assertion has always been that the Africa you see today is going to retrogress if we don't take leadership at the foundation of any meaningful economic policy seriously. If leadership continues to be ignored, no matter how well an economic policy is developed, the poor leadership at the national level, the poor discipline at the national level, at the local levels, is going to be exported. The reason we are not exporting global standard is because the culture at home is poor. So to have it changing from what it looks like currently is to devolve a new set of mindset, an attitudinal change towards work, an attitudinal change towards production, an attitudinal change towards trade-related relationships. The world cannot trust you if you are not trusted at home. If you have made promises to your citizens and you are not keeping them, if the indices of economic development are suggesting that there is no real development in your country, nobody is going to bring a foreign direct investment and cite it in those locations because of the imminent realities that are staring us boldly in the face. So it is clear logic that for Africa to rise up from the dust like the phoenix, it has to reassert itself. It has to take national policies seriously. As it is currently, we even have trust issues with ourselves. So,
we lost Dr. Andy. Of course, it's about fixing the home, learning globally, and of course, applying locally, ensuring that we contextualize the policies. And this, we need clear accountability that will give major stakeholders, especially political stakeholders, economic, actors, and even other, particularly the informal sector, into understanding the stakes of, their contribution to the autonomy or financial autonomy of the respective nations across the African continent. With you, Dr. Ashil Eke, what do you think is the role, or as the bank, maybe the financial institutions playing already that key role to ensure that there is a clear financial literacy, and even governments at the same time, literacy across the African continent, that will make, especially international trade more flexible and, beneficial for the African economies?
Wow, that means we have to figure out how to, in our current situation, influence changes around the world in order for us to be able to benefit from a system that we did not put in place. Which is going to be very difficult. The issue that one of the things that I mentioned earlier was the leadership. One of the the doctor that just lost his internet access. Leadership is important, right? So if we look at this summit that we go every year, we talked about this before, right? With different summits between Russia and Africa, between China, United States, and all these things. So we go there without a plan. We just go there, we talk about our issues individually, and then we go back home. So how can we expect to have an impact if we can't talk? We can have one voice, discussing those African issues, around the world. No, it's going to be hard, and so that's what we see, and structurally, the current situation in Africa is very difficult because the leadership that are put in place are people that are obeying the current, world order, and they are following that. They are not there for their people necessarily. They're there to do the bidding of people who supported them and financed their campaign and supported them to be in power. So that's why everything that we talked about here today is great, but the fundamentals are not, is what we're missing. The fundamentals are we have to have the leadership, the appropriate leadership that has that vision about developing Africa, loving African people, developing African people first, just like we talked about with the Sahelin countries. What is happening in Burkina, in Mali, it's not happening in a vacuum. Something happened at the leadership level that created those events, the situation that we see today that we all appreciate. They had too many coups d'etat because elections in Africa it's managed by Western countries. They decide who's going to be the leader, and those leaders are the most corrupt, people that are there to do the bidding of the Western countries. So we had a coup d'etat, and a new leadership came in those three countries, Niger, Burkina, and Mali. At the top of the country from elections, no, because they know elections are rigged. So those are the people who are the visions of Africa. Now they are the leadership that we're looking for in Africa. But we can't. It's difficult to have that leadership through elections, which is the problem that we have, because everything that's happening in Burkina Faso today comes from the fact that Traoré is a Pan-Africanist to the core. Assimi Goïta, same thing. Niger, same thing. So they have decided to stop dealing with Bretton Woods institutions, for the most part, and they are focusing on using their own resources that they have, human resources, mineral resources, whatnot, to develop their own countries. And so we all see, the results, as we see them today. They're wonderful to see. Everybody's excited about the future of Africa based on that. On that alliance that we're seeing today. But is it going to be replicable, in the whole continent?
Absolutely.
That's the issue. So we can replicate that, around the continent, and the Western countries are making sure that it doesn't replicate. You see France is still around, with its own troops trying to, to topple those governments, because they don't appreciate that those people could be independent. They're going to be doing their things. Without any control, selling their own resources, making decisions about education, and making decisions about the economic, financial, thing that's going to be helpful for them. And they don't like that. It's a system that we need to fight. And so what I was showing on those charts was the current situation overall in the continent now. And the thing is, what do we do now? The question is, what do we do now to get out of that situation? All right, I'm not. The chart was not. The aim was not to blame the Western countries, which I'm just stating the facts as we see them today. So, what do we do to change course? And I ended with the last chart that shows that we have a gap of $2.5 trillion that we may lose if we stay the course, in terms of GDP growth till 2043, which is in 17 years.
Yeah.
So. That's the thing that I was trying to convey, the message I was trying to convey. But I think, all of us agree that we need to make some drastic changes, drastic reforms. All of us, we can say it in different ways. Some say it with a lot of noise and a lot of agitation, but some are saying it quietly. But we are all agreeing that things need to change significantly for us to be able to change the course that we're taking right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, how can we change the course? And of course, how can this translate or relate into real development of that financial autonomy of Africa? I will come to you, Mr. Kofi, before I come back to you, Dr. Elijah. We are looking at the political will. If Africa needs to move forward, there is need for that people-centric leadership and also a political will that will defeat or probably mitigate the illicit financial flows, and also ensure that the philosophy or theory of accountability is respected to the fullest. Let's take it to a revamped African Union. What parameters do you think this body needs to put in place to, check in terms of auditing and whatsoever decisions that needs to be taken to ensure we solve this illicit financial flow and ensure accountability that will change the course or the pattern of leadership that will gradually translate into having those very strong institutions for the African continent?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. You just mentioned it, right? Illicit financial control in our part of the world. Let us face facts. The issue is that you don't have it, and the people are angry. Let me put it in a context. The people are angry. They don't have employment. They can't feed their family, and so many things they cannot do. So what it means to them is that they must find other means and other ways of getting money to survive. So it's about the survival of the people. So first and foremost, each country must be made to be aware to create employment for the youth, for its people. You go to, for instance, you come to Ghana just a few weeks ago, about 2 to 3 weeks ago. The University of Ghana have a lot of graduates that are coming up, a lot of doctors that are coming up. But the question you need to ask yourself is that, do they have the job market available for them to work to make a meaningful life? Are they being able to train to work on their own, to build themselves, to get to somewhere? We have not been able to do that. So there will be a lot of challenges. But let me say there's a lot of challenges in the system. So it becomes difficult for the African to be able to say, yes, I'll be able to be independent on my own. So there will be illegal financial control, illicit financial system in our economics that we find ourselves in Africa. So African Union and Africa, it becomes very, very difficult for them to say, this is what we expect each and every one of us to do, because we will not be able to create employment for our teeming youth, for ourselves, because of corruption, because of winner take all, because we don't have the political will to be able to set this agenda. And these are the problems that we have in our various countries. But don't forget, as other previous speakers has indicated, Burkina Faso has been able to move the agenda to a different level. Why is Ghana not able to move certain agenda to say we want to do things on our own? For instance, I remember some years back, I think just the former president of Ghana, Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo, said, Africa beyond aid, Ghana beyond aid. And what happened to that? Because they've not been able to put out the fundamentals right, and he said Africa beyond aid, all the Western world that are giving you the support will withdraw, and you find yourself in a big situation. So first and foremost, we must build the fundamentals and get it right. We must build the institutions, make them more independent. we must strengthen, our borders. When I talk of our borders, we must make sure that the borders that we have are well strengthened in such a way that we will not have porous environment that will give us challenges in the things that we find as.
Your sound, please.
Your sound is gone.
We lost Mr.
Yeah.
Coffee, I think subsequently. Coming back to you, Dr. Elijah Enoko, it is imperative for us to still reconcile these factors that will pave the way for.
Hello, am I there?
Yes,
Okay.
you're there, sir.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm saying is that we have to first and foremost build the fundamentals first. Until we build the fundamental, it becomes a very big challenge for us to be able to align ourselves to make sure that we are able to do what is being expected of us as countries and as a continent. Let's go to the drawing board and know what is fixable for us to work on them. Because you cannot go to class, you cannot go to 7 while you haven't finished with 2 and 3. It is important for us to do that. And for me, I will push that African leaders must realize that until, again, let me use the word again, we reset the agenda, we will not go anywhere. That is the first step for us to do. Mm-hmm. And then also, I'm of opinion that most of the time, African leaders make sure that
Mr. Coffee.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, you can run off, please.
Hello?
We
Yes.
can hear you, sir. While waiting for Mr. Coffee to fix everything, I was with you, Dr. Elijah Enoko. We are trying to reconcile all of these factors to ensure that we set a new preamble that is very clear of that to drive Africa's financial and even economic independence. Let's look at how, Africa's political rhetoric is a problem to its financial independence and how it is even not creating a favorable platform for the private sector that is a major boost to a country's, financial autonomy to thrive. How can we redefine all of these political rhetorics to translate into a systematic and a well-planned agenda that will propel Africa sooner or later to that financial independence, and which will actually be seen in the development. And I think a diversification of partners will help to also diversify, the understanding of the different development models used by countries in international trade to probably set a key strategy for Africa. But the political rhetoric of the country is so vulnerable that it has made it very difficult to bring in practical economic reforms that will prosper the continent. Let's have your take on this. Dr. Elijah Enoko.
Oh, sorry, I mistakenly muted myself.
Okay.
Let me answer your question in 2 parts. The first part is the political will, or let me say the second part is the political will, but the first part is just doing the basics, Mr. Henry talked about, some of the things that we need to put in place before we talk about one currency for Africa, this one. I think that is Western talking points. The West has used that talking point for a long time to continue to bring fear to the African countries that if you try this one monetary policy agenda, your economy is going to crash. You do not have this in place. But we are dealing with a continent that holds about, I think the last figure I saw was $3 trillion economy. I mean, African economy is around $3 trillion. Number two, you're dealing with an economy that out of that 3 trillion, the African countries, oops, I think I'm off camera here.
No,
Are we
we
good,
can
camera?
see you. It's just
Okay.
centralize your camera,
All right.
please.
All right. I think we're dealing with an economy that only trades 15% with itself. That is the latest figure, that the African countries, the intra-African trade is only 15%. Imagine what that does to the African continent, that African countries only trade with themselves 15% of their GDP. That means 75 or 85% is trading with the Western world. What does that mean? Or or Asian countries and so. What does that mean? Number one, you're talking about currency exchange. African lose horribly when it comes to currency exchange, because if you are not trading with yourself, if you do not have a single source of currency where you're not going through all these exchanges or whatnot back and forth, you are losing that. I think somebody already mentioned about trading in dollar or trading on this and trading in yen and trading in that. You're losing that to the foreign currency exchange that you're dealing with. So that's the number one problem that Africa needs to deal with. Now, number two, Mr. Henry talked about the tax system. If you see the leaks that happen from generating capital locally within the African economy, 80% of it comes through tax leaks, because the tax system is not digitized. You have these leaks. What we call leaks, in a nutshell, is just corruption, tax corruption. 80% of tax that are collected on the African continent ends up either through in the banks of corrupt individuals, or ends up being swindled in one way or the other. So that local market, it's not functional to raise capital for the African economy. That's why they're so dependent on the Western world, because they think that they are not able to generate revenue or generate capital locally, but they are. The capability, the capacity is there, but the means to get to that is not there. That's what I talk about institutions. Recently, I know some of these things that I mentioned, I'm not saying that should be applicable to Africa. Recently, we saw in China where somebody who bribed and stole government money was hung. That is something that's working for them. If you steal money in China, sorry, not Ghana, China, and it is proven beyond reasonable doubt, you are going to be given capital punishment. That is an institution that has worked for them for years. That's why you see that there's almost zero minimal corruption in the Chinese tax system or in the Chinese economy. The African system has not built those institutions that is going to guarantee low corruption. We say low corruption because it is almost impossible to have zero corruption. Even in the United States, there's corruption. There's corruption everywhere. But we are talking about the rate of corruption in African countries, that there are no institutions that are going to guarantee that revenue that is locally generated ends up in government coffers. And secondly, when it ends up in government coffers, it's going to be used for investment for public good. That is not happening in the African continent. Then number two, I talked about inter-trade within African economies. It is very, very minimal. You have an economy of close to $3 trillion and you only trade among yourself 15% of your GDP. That's what you're trading. How do you expect to be independent? You are dealing with a lot of foreign exchange and revenue and so on, and it's going to lead to so much dependence on those currencies. Number four, I think your question dwells on robust economic governance and institutions that strengthen that. There is something that the African, free trade wants to talk about. They want to talk about African renewal, which is the emphasis on the core sustainable financial system. If they exploit this, like the free trade agreement and all these other 17 pillars of the African free trade agreement and Agenda 2063, if I remember correctly, if they implement those pillars of those agendas, I'm telling you, Africa is going to go ahead. But the problem we have in Africa is you have all these things on paper, a lot of it's on paper, but nothing has really been done to move that agenda forward. It becomes a problem. A lot of good policies that are happening, being drafted on the continent of Africa, but the implementation is what is dragging Africa behind. And if we want to talk about the politics and everything, it's going to take us another day here. It's going to take us another day. Like my friend Ashi already said, the political system in Africa is the number one problem. The political system, because if you do not have the political will, because, I just mentioned Burkina Faso and Mali and a few other countries. These are leaders that have the political will to effect change. You can draft any other policy, you could draft an agenda, you could draft anything. But if you do not have leaders with the political will to implement that agenda, it ends on paper. And that's the problem in Africa. So we do not have this institution. Talk about separation of powers. If you have a Supreme Court, for example, that is going to investigate, I shouldn't say investigate, depending on the laws of the country, that is going to be independent of the executive. You have a judiciary system that is going to be independent of the executive. You have a legislative system that is going to be independent of the executive. And these powers act, these institutions act as checks and balances on one another. We are going to have this financial independence in Africa. But if you have one that controls the other, it becomes a problem. Who is going to bring checks and balances to the president of the republic? If he is the alpha and omega, he can jail, he can do anything he wants. Who is going to bring the checks and balances if he controls the agenda of the parliament? Who is going to bring the checks and balances if he is above the law? So these things are things that we need to institute in Africa, have the institutions that are going to guarantee that if we are instituting reforms, nobody is going to be above the law in Africa. It's going to help us that some of these wonderful strategies and wonderful plans that the African Union and some of the institutions are coming about are drafting, they are going to be implemented and going to have results. But if we do not have those systems in place, Clarice, we can be here talking about it, have all these wonderful programs, good governance, digitization, monetary policy, and so on. If we do not have the government, the power in place, good governance system that is going to act as check and balances, everything is going to go down the drain. So I know it's going to be a long discussion to bring the political aspect of it, but that is the foundation. That is the foundation.
Politics also dictates the economics, and we see that with the discrepancies along the political lines of the continent is making it very difficult. So how can we have a unified practical political agenda to transcend to a financial autonomous continent?
Okay, I think we all agree that that is the basics now. So
Sure.
In order for us to be able to achieve those basics, it's going to be important that all of you, the media, the political activists, the Pan-Africanists at core, people who are really there to fight for the good of for the good of the African people, those have to be the leaders that we should be electing to power, not those corrupt, people that are being chosen by Western countries to come and lead us the wrong way. So the fight that we have is through leadership that is voted to power. If we have to go by election, for me it doesn't matter how you get to power. I mean, at this point, as long as you are somebody who is there to fight for Africa, whether you get there through elections or through coup d'etat, as you know, France doesn't care. They decide their own coup d'etat. They put their own people in power to serve their will. So why can't we do the same? And the examples that we see in Mali, Burkina, it's showing that yes, if we have leaders that come to power through coup d'etat, it doesn't matter as long as they have that vision that they're implementing for their people. That's what matters at the end of the day, because the system now is locked in a way that to access access to the power. You look at Cameroon. It's very open. People, you go to elections and it's the same guy who wins every year, no matter what. And that happens all across Africa because those guys are, they are there to serve their masters and they don't even hide it. So it's a serious issue. And so that's why I've said we need to focus on electing Pan-Africanist people who believe in the sovereignty of Africa,
agenda,
in the good of African people, in the possibilities of Africa. Those are the kind of people that we need to elect to power. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long process. It's going to be frustrating. But at least some part of Africa have started. I was watching YouTube the other day and I saw somebody talking about an alliance between Zimbabwe, Namibia, and that country that has a lot of diamonds. What is that?
Botswana? Is it
Botswana? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know if it's true or not, but I read the title of that YouTube video. I didn't have a chance to watch it. They were talking about potential as IS number 2, another potential IS number 2, which I thought, wow, this is good. It's but I'm saying these that we have to use every way possible to put in power people who are going to be defending our own interests, not doing the bidding of the Western countries. That is the first thing. Once we do that, then everything is going to ensue because the policies that those people are going to put in power are going to be policies that we're all talking about here. Put together a system that is, to have checks and balances. People who are, like the Chinese, for example, they have their own system, of checks and balances. If you embezzle funds, you get killed. It's just plain and simple, so that people only not understand threats. If you don't threaten people with their life, they're not going to change. People are used to corruption. It's the only way. So if we keep putting people to jail, we have a group of people that came out of jail in Cameroon the other day. They spent 20 years in jail. Yeah, they spent 20 years in jail after embezzling billions of dollars. Now they're going to enjoy those billions of dollars that they spent, that they stole. And their families are celebrating. There are a lot of them like that in jail in Cameroon. They're waiting for their 20 years to be over and then they come out and then, go back to life as normal. No, it shouldn't happen like that. Sure. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Of course, we will continue to talk and also ensure that the talking will yield because it is actually yielding. Let's end up with you, Dr. Elijah Enwako, with some recommendations, be it to the policymakers and along the politicians, civil society, and even the media. I'm emphasizing on the media because to be able to have that new Africa, we need to have a perspective that align with the dynamics of the continent and, what can be done to probably go back to the preamble of these things to ensure that we talk Africa and also bring about, the African agenda, even if we are discussing at the global level.
Thank you. Let me give you some radical ideas, Clarice.
Sure.
The African media must be radical. The African media must talk about those despots. The African media must talk about all those draconian people that are sitting tight in Africa and destroying the continent of Africa. We saw that happen in some countries in Africa where the media stood its ground and condemned a lot of dictators in their country. Yes, some of them pay a price because some of the journalists and the people in media were sent to jail. But that country, as we speak today, is changing because of what media is doing. Number 2, I don't believe anymore in the policy of non-interference. I don't believe it anymore. African countries should stand up to all those sit-tight presidents. Those presidents that do not want to leave power. African countries must resist their colleagues that do not want to relinquish power. They should use those regional bodies, ECOWAS, CEMAC, SEDAC, North African Free Trade Agreement. If you have a few of them in there, that's what is happening in South Africa. If you see what's happening in the South African sub-region, Botswana and South Africa, They're putting, and then Kenya and Ethiopia, they're putting a lot of pressure on Zimbabwe to modernize. They're putting a lot of pressure on the Zimbabwean president to modernize. And you see what's happening there? Zimbabwe is being forced to modernize the economy, modernize the electoral system, modernize their tax system, modernize a lot of things in order to belong to SADC. I am hoping that all those regional bodies in Africa, ECOWAS should do the same thing. Instead of going after Traoré and going after Burkina Faso, they should go after those other sit-tight presidents in ECOWAS and make sure that instead of them destroying the electoral system in their country, they should intervene. What about CEMAC? Cameroon, Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon has already changed. Chad. The few countries that have democratic institutions should go after the others and say, you cannot, because here is the thing. If they do not do that, they are going to bear the brunt because they belong to the same economic group. They have the same monetary policy.
They should be doing that for the continent or for the country, and not also for political gains, because there's a whole lot of complexities when it has to do with geopolitics of trade and every other thing in the country.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Clarice. I'll give you an example in Cameroon, for instance. We're not going to politics, but let's talk about the CEMAC region. Mm-hmm. You saw what happened in Chad. That corrupt individuals within the Cameroon government duped the government of Chad on their oil savannah theft. I don't know if you follow that savannah issue. No. Who suffered? The Chadian government suffered heavily from that corruption. Absolutely. If they keep quiet within the CEMAC region and they do not condemn what's happening in Cameroon and they do not force, I'm not saying that Chad is an exception. I'm just giving an example of how something happens in one country and it's affecting the economy of the other country because they belong to the same monetary region, they belong to the same group, and they just sit quiet. It's going to bring all of them down. So they should forget about this policy of non-interference and push for policies in the other countries that are affecting them so that they will change all across Africa. It's happening in South African Development Region, in SADC. It's happening there. Zimbabwe is under pressure right now, and they are doing it because South Africa is saying, we belong to the same region, we are the same economic bloc, we have the same economic policy, and you are not changing your system. There's corruption in your economy. If you do not put these checks and balances in place, we're going to kick you out. And they're doing something about it. So the other regional blocs should be able to do that. That's what I'm suggesting to African countries.
Absolutely. It's about having the common agenda for the African continent and to ensure that the checks and balances will actually lead us to the Africa we want, the one that has financial, economic autonomy, the one that will have its political will, the one that will have a public policy that will, make the scope very fertile for the development, and also the one that will ensure a peaceful and serene atmosphere to attract foreign direct investment, some of the indicators of growth and development across the continent. We want to thank you so much, gentlemen, for the in-depth analysis pertaining the factors or the pillars of Africa's financial autonomy and what has to be done. It's a call now for all stakeholders, politicians, civil society, economic policy makers, the journalists, the media as a whole, and every other stakeholder that will help to educate, particularly the role especially of the informal sector in actually promoting a real development, growth and development across the African continent, so that we can actually have the Africa we want, African solutions to African problems. And it is on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that we draw the curtains into today's edition of the program Global Insider. We'll be together with you on a special edition, of course, on Tuesday, to continue to look at what foreign interference, especially on independent media organs in Africa, is actually causing the continent, and why it is imperative to protect these stakeholders. Thank you so much and have a lovely moment as you continue to watch programs on your Pan-African media. Thank you. Bye-bye.